As part of a greater movement of the Roman Renaissance in the late 15th century, there became a great upsurge and want to restore Rome to its former heights, and thus a cultural resurgence was sparked by inspiration from ancient Greek and Roman culture. The commission of the Bacchus was a clear example of this, with Cardinal Riario in 1496 challenging Michelangelo to create a statue in the ancient style of an Olympian deity that he could display among his other antiques in his palace. Yet ultimately, the Bacchus was rejected upon its completion and bought instead by Neoplatonic literato Jacopo Galli. The exact reason for its rejection by Riario is unclear, but most theories point towards Michelangelo's highly controversial and unprecedented depiction of the god Bacchus. A far cry from the idealized beauty as seen on ancient Greek freestanding statues and their Roman copies, Michelangelo depicts a drunken Bacchus with a protruding belly, ill-defined anatomy to the extent it seems effeminate, and precariously holding a wine cup as he lurches to the left and back, as if trying to regain balance. Indeed, Michelangelo deliberately undermines the classical idea of contrapposto, setting Bacchus instead in a state of disequilibrium, in his drunken stupor. Indeed, although Pliny in his natural history notes that a key component of Hellenistic sculpture, as opposed to the idealistic representation seen in classical art, was to depict men as they appeared, Michelangelo, in his Bacchus, can be said to have pushed even further beyond these norms of art from antiquity and created a distinctly unique style even within early Renaissance sculpture. This thus begs the question of what Michelangelo intended to achieve in this innovative take on the antique statuary copy. To fully grasp the intent behind this unflattering depiction, the convergence between contemporary Neoplatonic thought and ancient mythical depictions of the Greek god Dionysus must be explored. With Michelangelo's Bacchus, although undermining the sculptural tradition, I would argue demonstrates an adherence to mythical depictions of the Greek Dionysus through the attempt to convey Neoplatonic thought on the interrelation between wine and divine power. Both the Cardinal Riario and Jacopo Galli were part of an intellectual elite of Neoplatonic thinkers whom Bacchus had become a keen interest within their erudite drinking circles. In Neoplatonic thought of late 15th century, drinking was viewed with a distinction between a vulgar excess and divine madness, two states of being which were a fundamentally Neoplatonic concept. Indeed, Neoplatonic philosopher Pico della Mirandola, in his oration on the dignity of man, linked wine drinking with the secret rites of the Greeks, as a possible way into a higher sphere of intellectual thought where one could be possessed by these Socratic frenzies, elevating thought to an immortal plane. The Bacchic power of drinking was said to take control of its subject, utilizing its transformative power to subject the drinker to a divine madness to transcend mortal limits and elevate towards God. Wine thus became the drink of erudite circles of Neoplatonic philosophers who engaged in this morally superior form of drinking. Whilst as an extension of wine, Bacchus became symbolic of a power bridging the gap between the lower and higher sphere, aiding the process to divine knowledge, the end goal of philosophizing. Indeed, Michelangelo's Bacchus exemplified many of these Neoplatonic interpretations of Bacchus. For example, depicted in the round, there was no one viewpoint from which to view Bacchus. Thus, this dynamic process of viewing the statue acted as a perfect way through which Michelangelo could depict the process of the ascension to the higher plane of existence when being possessed by wine's divine madness. Bacchus's intermediary role between the higher and lower planes of existence are embodied through the conflicting representations from the viewer's left to the right of the statue as they make their way round. The Bacchus encourages the viewer to look at it from the right of the statue round, starting from the outstretched right hand and bent knee to the straightened left arm and leg, and then towards the grapes, animal pelt, and the satyr, who twists towards the back, with finally the head of the animal skin becoming visible towards the bottom. This process of viewing the statue allows the reader to capture the top-down descent of the moral decline from the higher world of frenzied divinity seen in the wine cup and grapes around his head towards a lower world of bestiality seen in the satyr's hooves and animal pelt. Indeed, this depiction of Bacchus's transcendent power can be further explored through parallels struck with Dionysian cult and the shared themes between Michelangelo's creation, Neoplatonic theory, and Dionysian myth. In Greek religion, Dionysus represented a liminal role in the pantheon of Olympian gods, and thus his myths reinforced this aspect of his identity through their social function of inverting codes of normality. Dionysian rites of passage can be divided into a three-part division of community, liminality, and reintegration. Liminality is characterized by a breakdown of normal concepts of identity and norms, and this liminal stage has the transformative power to invert social code and human identity, creating communitas, where individuality is stripped and all become part of the Dionysian mass. It is this transcendent power of liminality within Dionysian myth dissolving social codes and identity that can be linked with the Neoplatonic belief of the divine frenzy which Bacchus's wine can subject a drinker to. Indeed, in Plato's Phaedrus, the Dionysian frenzy is said to play the role as a philosophically creative force, taking possession of its subjects and leading them into an ecstasy in which they perform actions previously inaccessible. Neoplatonic beliefs thus can be said to act as the union of these pagan Christian moralizing tradition and ancient Greek Dionysian myths, marrying the role of Dionysus to possess his subjects with a transcendent power, with a Renaissance philosophical goal of reaching a philosophical state closer to God. Present on the Bacchus, therefore, are several aspects of Dionysian myth which Michelangelo adopted in light of contemporary academic thought. A key aspect of the intersection of traditional Greek myth and Renaissance thought can be seen in the depiction of Dionysic power and its capacity as a vehicle for transformation. Nietzsche, in his Birth of Tragedy, assigned metamorphosis as a key component of the Dionysic experience. Seen in Greek tragedy, he argued the participants underwent a dramatic transformation, stepping outside of themselves as an individual into a Dionysian collective. This transformative power of the Dionysian experience can similarly be seen on the Bacchus statue. As emphasized by the role of the multi-compositionality of the statue, a key theme is the depiction of the higher and lower forms of existence, with Bacchus acting as an intermediary to ascend to the higher plane. This is thus stressed, as previously mentioned, for the literal depiction of the statue of the lower bestial depiction of the animal skin and satyr's hooves, and the elevated upper half of Bacchus and his ivory crown. Indeed, through this distinction between Bacchus and the satyr, the Dionysic power of metamorphosis can be seen as Dionysus physically manifests the transcending divine frenzy. The satyr at a midpoint of transformation is literally depicted at mid-level, whilst Dionysus grabs onto the animal pelt as if dragging the satyr along and reaches out into the above. The trailing animal skin also serves great symbolic value of his Dionysian powers of transformation. The removal of one's clothing or even skin was a common expression of the transformation of a person in the Renaissance, and thus this depiction of the skin trailing behind can be said to be symbolic of Bacchus's stripping of bestiality through the act of removing the animal skin. Indeed, the skin, if a lion, carries Dionysian motifs of transformation from the Homeric hymn to Dionysus, where the wine god temporarily takes the form of the lion as a manifestation of his powers of transformation. Additionally, Bacchus not only embodies the metamorphic nature of Dionysian power, but also reinforces the possessive nature of this power, reflective of how the god subjects those to his divine frenzy. The multi-compositional viewpoints of the statue help to play into a common motif from Dionysian iconography, that of the use of the eye to emphasize the Bacchic power of possession. As Bacchus looks playfully at his wine cup when the viewer lines up the cup handle on Bacchus's right eye, it has the effect of looking directly at the viewer. Acting as a means through which Dionysus could take possession of his subject, he was one of the few Greek characters depicted frontally in Greek art, with eye contact being a means through which he could possess you in his divine frenzy. Similarly, wine also serves as an iconographical example of Dionysian possession. Wine is literally representative of Dionysus being inside the drinker, demonstrates another avenue of access that Bacchus can take to possess them. Finally, the tree trunk on which the satyr rests, as well as acting as a support for the marble, can be said to have further Dionysiac symbolism of the phallus, which again has connotations as a means of gaining possession. The erect phallus acts as both a means of gaining power over others through penetration, as well as the nature of lust. The lust also serves to hold its wielder in a state of subjection to their own desire. The iconographical similarities and depictions of Greek myth and antiquity in Michelangelo's Bacchus thus reinforces the nature in which Michelangelo was influenced by Greek Dionysian myth. Indeed, the interrelation of Neoplatonic thought and ancient myth serves to encapsulate the way in which Michelangelo explored Bacchic power through his statue. Conveying contemporary thought on the role of wine in philosophical debate through the use of iconography and ideas from Dionysian myth, Michelangelo's Bacchus represents a union of both ancient myth and Christian morality, which Michelangelo uses to stimulate academic thought and evoke deeper meanings within his work.